think we can formally begin for this museum night, which is Noche de Museo, museum night in Spanish. So we do a Noche de Museo once a year, where we celebrate Latin American art and culture. We celebrate Hispanic History Month, or Hispanic Month, Heritage Month, which runs generally September 15th to October 15th. So we're kind of kicking off Hispanic Heritage Month. And I want to begin by saying, of course, the five of us are not going to cover all of Hispanic heritage or all of Latin America. The diversity is so fecund and broad that we're only going to take a small slice of the pie. But we hope that tonight, the art that we talk about, the films that we talk about, the projects we talk about become, if it's a small slice, sort of a wedge, a way in for many of our visitors into Latin American culture to learn more. It's an opportunity for me to learn more. I'm really excited. So we approach it with the spirit of, we know this is not representation of Latin America, but it's an invitation to grow and learn more. I'm Eric Siegel. Hi, everybody. I'm Director of Education here at the Harn Museum of Art. I am joined, as you can see, by 4 amazing guests. And I'm going to begin with Juanita Duque, I'm sorry. I'm sorry? Duque. We've corresponded by email a lot, but we haven't gotten to meet in person, which makes me sad, anytime recently or online. Juanita is leading the Gainesville Latino Film Festival. She's taken up the mantle from Victoria Condor Williams, who led it for many years, and you're doing such a great job. You have a great program. I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint to get us going, and we can share a little bit about your program. I might have a couple things I'm supposed to have said already that the PowerPoint will remind me of. So here we go. Screen sharing, museum nights, great. And we're jumping right in. So,
okay, so as thank you, Eric. As you mentioned, my name is Juanita Duque, and I am directing this year's Gainesville Latino Film Festival. Our theme this year is Unity and Community, Unidad en Comunidad, and it is just meant to highlight how important it is for us to come together through whatever means we can in these strange times that we're living in. It is our 16th year with putting together the film festival, but it is the first time that we go completely virtual. So all of our films and all of our events are going to be online. And we have a great lineup that starts tonight with Birds of Passage that you can see on the screen there. And all of the films will be available for a week, so you can watch at your own convenience. And then Eric, if you can go to the next slide. Our events are going to be kicked off by the Wayfaring Painter Artist Workshop, which starts this Saturday at 11 a.m. And you can find more information on our website at the GainesvilleLatinoFilmFestival.com. But please stay and enjoy the great program that the Harn has put together for Noche de Museo tonight.
Thank you, Juanita. And so this is great event where it's the museum partnering with the Latino Film Festival, partnering with Wayfaring Painter, and they have created an amazing project that you can do at home. And I'm going to share a little video here with Paige, who's describing a little bit about the project. So let me move this out of the way and have Paige chime in.
Welcome to Museum Nights Noche de Museo. My name is Paige, and I'm an educator at the Harn Museum of Art. For this week's Harn at Home, we partnered with Wayfaring Painter and the Gainesville Latino Film Festival to develop art-making experiences inspired by Emilio Sanchez, a Cuban-American artist known for his paintings and prints of architectural subjects. Visit our website to discover how Sanchez uses color, pattern, shadow, and form to create architectural studies of places in the United States and Latin America, then experiment with capturing a sense of place in your own unique style by participating in the #HarnAtHome challenge. Then, take your creativity to the next level by downloading the PD Paper Details activities featured on our website and by joining Wayfaring Painter for their virtual artist workshop this Saturday, September 12th from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. This free Zoom session will feature Kristen Lopez, founder and teaching artist, demonstrating 3 unique bookmaking techniques inspired by Sanchez's Casita print series. Let's get creative.
All righty. Fabulous. So this is a really neat project. It's inspired by Harn artwork and really is something you can do at home, and you can engage with Wayfaring Painters project as well. So Juanita, thank you for joining us. Have a great kickoff. Thanks also for your Unidad and Comunidad theme, which is really inspiring. And we wish you well with the film festival. We look forward to seeing you at the films.
Thank you for having me, and I hope people join in to make these little casita books and then the 3D casitas as well. It should be a lot of fun.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. We'll see you, Juanita. All righty. So, and here's a little more information. And again, if you want to find out more about the projects and Wayfaring Painter, you can search for them on Facebook and find them at wayfaringpainter.org. Oh, we're jumping right in, Derek.
Perfect.
So let me, if you don't mind, just let everyone know who you are. Derek Berdette is, I think you're the newest member of the art history faculty at the University of Florida. Welcome.
Yeah, Albert and I share that title, so we sort of entered together, yeah.
That's right, there's 2 of you. And you're a specialist in Latin American art history with a focus in Mexico before and after the conquest. And your research focuses on religion, and Derek's research, I don't have to tell you, focuses on religion and colonialism in Latin America. So we feel really lucky to have you. And what I've asked our guests to do, Derek, Efraín, and Dulce, is to just pick a work of art from the Harn that moves them or which they find pleasure in, which they have a personal connection to, and to share it with us just on that level and in any way that feels inspiring to them. So with that, Derek, we have the photographs and the video, and you can just let me know what to show when.
Yeah, great. So I will chat for a minute, and then I'll have you run the video, and then we can sort of move through to some of those photos in just a second. Does that work, Eric?
Sounds great.
Perfect. So when Eric approached me about thinking about an artwork, I immediately was sort of thinking, okay, what have I seen in the collection that would be worth pulling out and talking a little bit more about? And I chose a really diminutive artwork, so a really small artwork, right? That is, you know, under a foot tall. It's a figurine. It's a small image, but I think it really rewards some close looking. And so I thought it would be a great object to talk about for just a few minutes because it's something that might not catch your attention. It's not often on display. Eric, you'd have to tell me if it has been on display recently. I know it currently is off display. So it's a chance to pull something out from the sort of inner workings of the museum and to give it a little bit of visibility. So I thought that was a great opportunity. So before I tell you a little bit more about the historical context of this artwork or talk a little bit more about what I was drawn to formally, I think maybe it would be great just to look at the artwork together. So Eric actually was able to film, I'm sure in conjunction with some other folks whose labor should be recognized, but a very brief video that shows the artwork being manipulated so we can get a sense of how it in 2 things really. You get a sense of its scale, so how big is it compared to the human hand, and then also you get a sense of how it's been sculpted in the round, so we get a sense of it from multiple perspectives. So Eric, let's just go ahead and move forward now to that video.
I will do. And thanks for the shout out to the people who were part of making it. Beth Heinrichs from Registration brought the object up, and we're going to see her hands gloved for the protection of the artwork in this video.
Yeah, great. So thank you to Beth for making this possible. So I won't talk during the whole video, but I will just sort of point out a few pieces of interest here, right? So one, as we're seeing the artwork moved around, notice that it does have a really intense kind of geometry to it, right? So we can see that it has a really flat front, and it operates in a kind of triangular kind of composition. So it has this nice angular back that gives it great balance. Balance compositionally, and here you can really see the triangle in the base, right? But also literal balance. So the ability to sort of be seated, right? So, and then Eric, let's just go to the next, still, yeah, perfect. So this artwork is a figurine that is part of a broader collection of artworks that are often referred to as Jaina figurines, and they take their name from the geographic location in which they were unearthed. And all of the Jaina figurines are actually were excavated from a necropolis or a burial site that it lies just off of the coast of what is today the current state of Campeche in the Yucatan Peninsula in southern Mexico. And this island, this necropolis from which these artworks were excavated is small. It's about a half square mile. And in that half square mile, there were 20,000 burials that we know of. When I last read, about 1,000 of those had been excavated. So we have a small fraction of the material evidence that might still reside in this place. And this idea that you have a very small island off the coast that is filled with burials, right, suggests that it was a site to which people traveled, elite members of Maya society. We're talking the necropolis itself was known to have been active between 300 and 1200 CE. And then this artwork is dated to the very middle of that date range, right, from about 550 to 830 CE. So we know that over hundreds and hundreds of years, people were interred within this sacred site, right? A site that was really shaped by burials. And this and other artworks like it were part of the burial process for members of the elite Maya society who were interred there. And so this is an object that would have been buried with an individual. And it offers us a cultural glimpse into essentially the life of people through their death, right, that were living in this region and that were producing artworks that could sort of play a significant role in their afterlife. So it tells us something about their life by telling us about their afterlife. The cultural context of its discovery and the implications of it having been unearthed in a burial are complicated, right? So I just want to recognize that complication before turning and kind of pivoting to a formal analysis. And I'll be really explicit and just say it's like that when we are looking historically at goods that were buried with people, we should reflect upon whether or not what the sort of moral implications of having unearthed burials are. And so that is a sort of polemic issue that I want to recognize as we move forward here. But, the artwork itself, I wanted to just highlight some of the formal elements that I think caught my attention. And in particular, I'll highlight, I think maybe 2 or 3. The first is a very specific kind of naturalism that we see in the Jaina figurines that's really representative of the broader style of classic Maya art from Mesoamerica. And this is a naturalism that means that we don't look at this image and immediately think that it could stand up and walk away, right? Its body still has rounded shoulders, and we see a very small legs compared to a much larger torso. And yet, it is a really naturalistic representation of the human face and of the body's form as a whole. There are digits that are rendered, right? Fingers and toes, and you get a really clear sort of like depiction of a person's face that really looks like a person, right? And these Jaina figurines are super cool because they render visible some of the sort of intricacies of individual identities. So some of the figurines that exist, and there are thousands of them, some of them show women working with backstrap looms or men wearing regalia for battle or for sport. And so we see in these characters some snapshots of the roles that people might have played or the identities that people might have performed. Here, so that's the first thing I really love about this artwork, is the way that it captures a kind of naturalism, right? This sort of rendering of an actual figure. The second thing I really love is the stylization of the body itself, which dissolves into a kind of plane. And so we see this very circular shape. We know that these artworks were made, some using molds so that they could be produced rapidly and for lots of consumers. Some then with the addition of modeled elements where pieces of clay could be placed onto those modeled, to those molded objects. And so here we see a large disc having been created and attached, and maybe advance to the next slide for me. And so attached to the base, and we can see that disc at the very top. And I just wanted to highlight some of the intricacies of pigment that are then applied to that, to the rest of this artwork. We can see here incised lines at the back of the hair, these small details that yeah, exactly, thank you, Eric, that I really love. And you can see some black pigment further down. And then in all of these small details, what this artwork does when you're actually looking at it, and I brought students to look at it last semester, is that it's very intimate. It's intimate scaled. It feels like you should hold it because it has this sort of weight on the bottom. And maybe slide to the next, move to the next slide. Right, so because it has this neat little bottom, you seem to want to cup it from behind and hold it in your hands. And as you're holding it, kind of cupping it in your hands and looking at it, it feels natural to kind of connect with it, to look closer, to look in great detail. And that close looking really rewards the viewer with those incised lines. And then we'll do one more slide, which should be our last slide, Eric. And when we then return to the front, we can see that as you look more closely, you can see the residue of blue pigment on the front. And so what would have been this shockingly blue piece of textile, right? The perception of a blue textile across the front of this woman who wears great big ear spools and a really large necklace. And you can imagine with this great sort of adornment in her hair, and you can imagine then sort of historically thinking about seeing this object with great color, with great attention to detail, and with all of the sort of care that went into its production, and then its subsequent interment in a burial. And I think it provides us a really intimate moment, a moment where we can think about the intimacy that people might have had with art from the past. So I will wrap up there just by saying that this is a very small, right, at less than 8 inches. And in this very small artwork, we get a glimpse of some of the Maya naturalism, this naturalism that really defines the style of Maya artists from the period. We get great attention to detail that would have made mass-produced objects feel really intricate. And we get some traces of color and adornment in this figure that might help us really activate our historical imagination as we think about what this might have looked like, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So this is a super cool artwork. I hope in some future moment it'll be visible for folks who want to drop into the Harn and see it. I'm sure at some point the seas will blow that way. So thanks, Eric, for the opportunity to come and share a little bit about this work and to talk a little bit about it.
Derek, thank you so much. So I've seen images of this figurine and have seen it on a shelf. I don't recall if I've seen it displayed, but I will advocate for that. Of course, I know when you brought your students to view it, it's wonderful to have you help us look closer and discover details in it. I'm curious, and if when you brought your students last semester, if looking with them opened your eyes to aspects, if they discovered anything or responded in ways that surprised you or took an unexpected direction.
Right. I think what really stuck out for me, and this is maybe less of a sophisticated answer than you might have been looking for, but what really stuck out for me is how much people want to hold it, right? So holding it is not possible, right? For the students who come to the museum. And yet it seems to ask you to hold it. It's very form, right? That it's under 8 inches, that it has the shape. I kind of mentioned these things earlier, right? And so even as the students are kind of crowded around a table, encroaching upon that space, there is this sort of desire to sort of not just see it, but to sort of experience it in that tactile way. And I think that's different than how we might experience approaching a really large painting. Like some of the star artworks in the Harn, right? You could feel like you really engaged with that artwork. The Kahende Wiley jumps out, right? You could feel like you've engaged with that artwork without feeling it. And yet this artwork seems to sort of want you to pick it up. And the students really were aware of that. And I feel like we had to sort of rein ourselves in. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you for sharing that. And that doesn't come through as much in a digital image. So it's wonderful to hear that response. And it makes me think I should mention that we're here online. We're not holding this event in person as we would under different conditions, but the museum is open. That doesn't mean you can touch anything in the museum, but we invite you to come Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Those are our current open hours. Their hours are online on our website. And we do invite you to come and explore the museum and feel that physical relationship to an object, not touching, but smelling, looking, moving with, to experience that in person. Derek?
There were a couple things you could touch in the
BSC, the Bishop Study Center?
In the Bishop Study Center. For anybody that makes a visit, and is it down?
It's closed for COVID.
Okay, never mind. I apologize.
We will do that in the future.
Yeah.
All right. Wonderful, Derek. Applause and appreciation.
Thank you.
Efraín, I think we're going to start with your first slide. Okay. You're going to have a couple of change ups on us, but that will all work smoothly. Efraín Barradas is shockingly, disappointingly, but we're happy for him, emeritus, which means he's retired faculty from UF recently, but it also means he brings enormous wisdom and perspective and expertise to our looking at this work by Jose Guadalupe Posada this evening. Efraín was faculty in Latin American Studies. He has worked on the Caribbean and on Latino cultures, and his research in recent times has actually focused on popular culture and Latin American literature and art. So who better to lead us on a looking experience of this work than Efraín? Professor Barradas.
This is a print by Posada. I selected it for two reasons. First one is my own aesthetic formation has a lot to do with prints. I come from Puerto Rico, and there is a huge tradition in Puerto Rico of printmakers. And secondly, I selected this piece because I also thought that it would be a good way to tell people that prints are not reproductions, that prints are work of arts in their own right. People tend to confuse prints with reproductions, and this is not a reproduction, but an original work of art. Now, please look at the top part of this print, because it's going to be of interest to us. Jose Guadalupe Posada was born in center of Mexico in the city of Aguascalientes in 1852, and he died in 1913. He was completely poor. He had absolutely no money. He was buried in a common grave. We don't know where he is, where the body was buried. But he worked for many years in Mexico City with a man named Antonio Venegas Arroyo, who had a printing shop. Now, look at the color of our print. It's pink. The pink has faded a bit, but it was very, very strong print. Now, Eric, could we go back to stop the PowerPoint? And
yes, here we are.
Okay. And
so you're on. You should. I think you'll be.
Okay. So if okay. Now I wanted to show you what the print really was like. This is the format that those prints came when Posada made them. Now, as you see, this isn't the image, and this was what was done by Posada, okay? Now, there is a prose text which tells the story, and there is a song at the bottom. This particular one was printed in a very, 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 very bright green paper. I'm sure you will not be able to see it. You have to believe me, but and this is one of the reasons why I frame it this way. This bottom part, you can see the green color, a little bit of it. The person who owned this didn't take very good care of it while he had it. And I must say he is a curator at a very important museum, but didn't take good care of it. And
not the Harn Museum of Art.
Not the Harn Museum, not the Harn Museum. So it was matted because, as you can see, it's torn here. Now, because it was matted, we saved a little bit of the green. But these prints were made in very, very, very inexpensive paper. Very bad paper. This sold for a few pennies in the market. And basically what they did was, there was even a story that was very popular, a news. In this case, it's a gruesome story of this woman, Guadalupe Bejarano, who went out to the countryside and hired young Indian women to come be her servant. But what she did was she tortured them and killed them. And she was, the police found all about this. In this particular one, you can see the young woman here, her hands tied, their spot in the body, she burned her with coal. There is a skull over here, okay? And so these were news, very shocking news, and Posada made an image about it. There is, the story is told here, and then there's a corrido, which is a song, okay? Now, I'll show you another one. This is the same format. You see the image, and this was the only thing Posada did. This is the text, and this is the song. And this one is about a man named Jesus Bruno Martinez, who was a thief, and he was finally caught. So you can see the kind of themes that were popular for Posada. Now, the one we own only has the image, and you will say, why? Well, it only has the image because it's a restrike. It's not an old one like this one. These were the original ones. So what happened is, in the 1920s, Posada, remember, he died in 1913. The beginning of the Mexican Revolution is 1910. We usually think that by 1920, the Mexican Revolution is ended. That's iffy if we can call it the end, 1920. But something happened after 1920, and it was the fact that there was a major interest in folk art. One of the first things the Mexican government did in the early 20s was to commission an artist to go all through Mexico collecting folk art. And they had a very big exhibition of Mexican folk art. It was the first time that folk art was considered worthy of a museum. And so this completely changed everything. And Posada became part of that folk art movement. People were interested in Posada. So in the 1920s, Posada was dead. But the editor, Venega Arroyo, had the plates. So what he did, he printed, reprinted, he did restrikes of the plates. That's why ours only has the image, doesn't have the text. I mean, the rest of the print, the printed matter would just disappear. It was just the print, the text. It was like newspaper, but they were able to preserve the image. So we know from ours that it's a restrike from about the 1920s. Okay, well, how do we know that? We know that because of the color. Now, there are restrikes that have been made. The most recent one that I saw was 2005. There are certain museums that have the plates. The Chicago Art Institute, for example, has 4 little plates, and they have done a little book on Posada with the restrikes of those. And the most recent ones are done in very good paper and white paper, so you can see the image. But ours, it's in pink, and it is not, it's not the original early one, but it is a very early restrike. I ask you to look at the originally the print, the top, because we can see in that print that, because this is an etching, and the plates in an etching are destroyed little by little, and they become blurry. Ours are blurry on the top because it's a restrike, okay? Now, Posada made hundreds and hundreds of these. Now, today, they're very hard to find. Some museums are very lucky and have some of them. We have about 4 of them. And Dulce was very dulce with me, and she took me to the storage and showed me a few years ago what we had. And I remember that I discovered that one of the posadas was not a posada, was by someone else, Manilla, but we're lucky to have those. Now, Eric, could you go to the slide, PowerPoint?
You bet. I'm calling that up now.
Now, this is the posada. You can see the top part, how it's fading. The center is very good. Second slide, Eric. You see, this is a restrike, but this is a restrike, contemporary restrike, very recent restrike. Now, this is the most famous of Posada's images. It's called La Catrina, La Calavera Catrina, the fancy lady, okay? Now, Posada did prints with skulls, calaveras. This is a whole long tradition in Mexican culture. Now, these are the most sought after of all posadas. Okay, these are extremely valuable, and people love these because of that whole tradition. That doesn't mean that Posada did only this, but they became in the 20s what he did. Next one. Okay, he did everything with the skull. Here's a Don Quixote with the skull. Next one. Now, I couldn't resist introducing this slide for you. This is from Mexico, a photo from Mexico, and we have there a coffin, and we have beer. This kind of play always in Mexican culture with life and death. But also, I liked it because funeral wreaths are called in Spanish coronas. So there's an extra level of play here with the corona. Now, I selected this image because what happened in the 1920s was that many Europeans, intellectuals and artists, came to Mexico. And while they were in Mexico, they decided that they were surprised with Mexican culture. André Breton, the father of surrealism, came to Mexico in the 1930s, and he stated, Mexico is the country of surrealism. Surrealism grows naturally in Mexico. In a sense, it's like Real Maravilloso, the idea that Latin American culture is magical. Well, it also happens with surrealism. And that's why what Posada was so thought after, because you can read surrealism into those Posada prints. Next. Now, this is the whole one. You see how in very bad shape they are. Okay, these were destroyed. I mean, basically, it was very bad paper. It was sold in the market. To find one of these, especially with a skull, it's very, very hard. Posada did a lot of political work. He wasn't very much of a fan of Zapata, and this is a caricature of Zapata. Next. In November 18th, 1901, the police raided a very fancy house in Mexico City, and they discovered 42 men, half of them in drag. They were having a ball, literally a ball. Well, the police arrested them, and they're called Los 41 because one of them was taken out from the arrest. We know now that that was the Porfirio Diaz, the dictator's son-in-law. So Posada made fun of them. But today we use these images of Posada to talk about the origins of gay liberation in Mexico. Okay, Mexican gay people are very proud of this, even though it's a grotesque image. It is used. This is Mexico's Stonewall. Okay, next one. Now, what you have here is not a Posada. It's a print by Leopoldo Mendez. Leopoldo Mendez is really the next great printmaker in Mexico. And this is a homage to Posada. The figure in the center is Posada himself. He presents Posada looking at social unrest in the streets. The print is not true to history because the two guys on the left are the Mangon brothers, who were not related or friends with Posada. But you can see how Posada is kept alive in Mexican culture. Next. Probably the greatest homage to Posada is this huge mural by Diego Rivera called Dream of a Sunday Afternoon in Alameda Park. This used to be in a hotel right in front of Alameda Park. In the earthquake of 1985, the hotel was damaged, and they had to be destroyed. But fortunately for us, the mural was safe. But what I want to show you is the real center of the mural. From left to right, you go from the colonial period, Hernán Cortés, to Mexican Revolution on the right. But right in the middle, you have the Catrina. And next to the Catrina is Posada. And on the other side is a self-portrait of Diego Rivera as a young boy. Diego Rivera, who was a compulsive liar, said that he studied with Posada. That was not true. But he did admire Posada a great deal. Okay. Can we come back to here? Okay. I wanted to show you another piece, not by Posada. This is by a man named Darío Castillejo, who's one of the most important cartoonists in Mexico. He even does cartoons for The Nation here in the United States. And this is a drawing that he did of Posada for the centenary homage that they did of his death in 2013. Posada is alive, very much alive. And you can see it in Diego Rivera, you can see it in Leopoldo Mendez, you can see it also in Castillejo. There are many proof of that, of Posada. And I just want to finish with the last slide to show you that Posada is alive and well.
Oh, that's
This
wonderful.
is Professor Barradas in Oaxaca last November in the Zócalo in Oaxaca, where there was this Catrina kind of homage to Posada. I became the anthropologist for a moment and started observing before I had the picture with this guy. And I thought for the beginning that it would be the tourists who would be taking pictures or will ask to have a picture with him. But it was not so. It was mainly the Mexicans. And I remember this little girl, about 5 years old, with her father and the father and mother trying to get her to pose with the Catrina. For me, that was the best proof that Posada is very much alive in Mexico. And that's why I selected that Posada print for today. Thank you very much.
Hear, hear. Thank you, Professor Barradas. I've got a couple of questions. A comment from Jordan McKenzie is, wow, which I will second, especially with this photograph. I'm going to just pop back to the Posada image. There, oopsie, there we go. And Dan Ponderosa asks, why are skulls a tradition in Mexican culture?
Okay.
I know you deal with literature as well as arts. Is it a theme that you've given consideration to?
There are a lot of theories about that. And one of them says that it's a combination of the pre-Hispanic traditions. Remember, in pre-Hispanic traditions in the cities, when you enter the city, there will be bars with skulls of enemies that had been killed at battle. And they were telling you, beware, look what can happen to you if you come in. In colonial art, you also see this theme of death. And so it's a whole tradition that is in Mexico, okay? Remember the importance of the Day of the Dead in Mexican culture. So Posada didn't invent it. It was there. Posada just continued it and made it very, very, very iconic.
Great. Juanita, who was here with us earlier from Gainesville Latino Film Festival, says, thank you, Professor. And she also points out that there's a puzzle activity we have for the Posada in our Harn at Home website. For anyone who wants a puzzle or an art activity, please check out Harn at Home on the Harn Museum, harn.ufl.edu website. And I'm going to save another question from Inake for our conversation later.
Okay.
And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing now, Dulce. This is Dulce's nervous time. She's going to share her screen and take the stage. We're hoping our technology treats us well.
Yes, I hope so too. Okay, I'm going to try to share my screen. Hold on just a moment. Let me get to the right one.
While you're doing that, I'll just share. Inake Rodeno asked a question, but she also just made an observation that I'll share, which is that many of the corrido themes, you mentioned the songs, the corrido songs, many of those themes of the time dealt with similar topics, bandits and thieves, similar to ones you were showing us in images, Efraín. And corrido ballads were extremely popular in the border areas, especially among Mexican populations in resistance to Anglo-American settlers and in relation to Mexican Revolution. She's really interested in that border area and the corrido themes, but she's also interested in popular art that might have flourished in that location. So maybe we'll talk about that later as well. It looks like Dulce's ready for us.
Oh, good. So everyone sees my first slide. Okay, good. I was concerned that wasn't going to work. Well, I'd like to share with you my thoughts on a drawing that is by the famous Mexican painter Diego Rivera, who Professor Barradas has brought us to just a moment ago. And I'll also share some pictures of some of my travels in Mexico where I was able to see some of his great murals in person, and they're quite masterpieces and super awe-inspiring. The subject of this drawing in the Harn collection is a man with a wide-brimmed hat who's bending over as he drives a pickaxe into the ground. We can imagine that the wide-brimmed hat is providing shade from the glaring sun. He's working outdoors. This is a very simplified figure composed of bold strokes that create the outline of the figure. There's no addition of shading or color. And you can also see faint lines that represent his thought process. So Rivera thinking out the lines that would compose the figure and then reinforcing with darker strokes of his charcoal. And the theme of the worker is a very common theme. in his work. Here are a couple of other examples. Oh no, and now it's not advancing. Oh dear.
While you're switching around to try to get that going, I'm going to mention that our viewers on YouTube, the way the screen's set up, they can't see the top right corner of this drawing, which says road worker in English. So I'm curious about that. We'll come back to that later, perhaps. But the way the YouTube live stream is working on, it's just covering that corner.
Okay, here we go. I don't know what happened. I've got it. So here are a couple other examples of drawings by Rivera in other collections. The one on the left is labeled road worker, just like the one at the Harn. And the one on the right is a stonemason. And both of them are the same scale as the drawing at the Harn, roughly 11 by 15 inches. So these aren't tiny drawings, but they're not huge either. Rivera was most famous for his large-scale mural paintings, and a lot of them depict workers and scenes of Mexican life and history. And he painted in this very distinctive style, featuring large, simplified figures with very lots of bold colors. And drawings like these might have been preparatory studies for paintings, or even for some of his large-scale murals. And this possibility leads me to think about some of the murals that I saw during my travels in Mexico years ago. And this was a very eye-opening experience that I think about every time I look at our road worker drawing. He was a crusader for the rights of workers, and many of his murals celebrate the common people and their struggles against the wealthy elite. His first large-scale mural project was for the Ministry of Public Education. And this is a complex in Mexico City. And here I'm showing you a street view on the left, and then on the right, one of the two interior courtyards. So Rivera worked here between 1923 and 1928 with a team of assistants to paint 125 murals. And these were in the fresco technique, which means he painted them directly on wet plaster instead of on canvas. And so the reason for this in this location was because these were open air murals in a courtyard where they would have been subject to the elements. And so canvases wouldn't have held up very well there. This is not a location that's on the typical tourists list of places to see in Mexico City. It's not a museum, but it's definitely not to be missed. And I'm so glad that I made the extra effort to find my way there. It was originally a convent, and then in the 20th century, it was converted into the headquarters of the Ministry of Education. The murals, as I said, are open air, and they're painted along the passageways lining the offices. You see the line of doorways leading to the different offices of the education department. So you can look up very closely, very close and personal with these works, not like in a museum. They're not behind barriers or glass, or there are no alarms if you look up very close, but I'm sure that there are guards watching to make sure people don't touch. The unifying theme of the murals here is Mexico's history and the peoples, especially the common workers, common people, peasants, and people of that nature. Rivera named the two courtyards here, the Labor Courtyard and the Fiesta Courtyard, and those names are based on the themes that he chose for each of the two courtyards. I want to point out the wavy scrolls in red that you see at the top of the picture on the right. He painted these ribbons with revolutionary messages among a lot of the murals. And for example, one of them says, "He who wants to eat must work." So next, I'm going to show you just a couple examples from this series. Several of the scenes like this one show men working in mines. You have entry to the mine, exit from the mine, and here they are working in the mine. All the murals show Rivera's solid human figures, the precise outlines like we saw in the drawing at the Harn, and these are monumental figures. They're in a crowded setting, but they're shallow spaces, and then the whole space is enlivened with bright and bold colors. Here's another example, and you can see the doorways flanking each of these murals that I'm showing you. This one shows two men and a woman, and they're dyeing fabric panels and then hanging them to dry in the sun. And we have a peaceful landscape behind them and a beautiful scenic village in the background. And Rivera emphasized the beauty and the dignity of the working class in these scenes and presented this utopian vision that you see here of Mexican society under socialism. According to the socialist view, individuals do not live or work in isolation, but they live in cooperation with each other, and everything that people produce is in some sense a social product, and everyone who contributes to the production of a good is entitled to share in it. I'm moving on to another famous cycle by Diego Rivera. So this is another, we're going to look at another mural in this building. This is the Palacio de Bellas Artes, which is the Palace of Fine Arts in Mexico City. And it's a very grand building in the historic center of the city. It's next to the Alameda Central Park, which also brings us back to Professor Barradas' comments on the beautiful series cycle that Rivera did in homage to Posada in the hotel that no longer exists because it was destroyed by the earthquake. This is a theater, and it also houses exhibition spaces. The building was constructed between 1904 and 1932, but there was a period of years where it sat unfinished because of the revolution. This is a view of the magnificent interior. You don't see the monumental staircase, but there is one that leads up to several levels. And on the sides of the interior, you have large-scale murals by Rivera and also some of the other famous muralists who were working during the same period, like Rufino Tamayo, David Alfaro Siqueiros, and Jose Clemente Orozco. This is my last slide, and I'd like to spend a little bit of time on this one because it's a very elaborate, complex painting, complex imagery. This is the mural that Rivera painted for the Palace of Fine Arts, and it's on the third floor of the building. It's called Man, Controller of the Universe. The main theme involves technology, such as the discoveries that were made possible by microscopes and telescopes, and then the impact of that technology on society. Now, this painting is actually a recreation of a mural that Rivera was originally commissioned to paint in 1932 by John D. Rockefeller Jr. for New York Center's Rockefeller Center. And the title of that version was Man at the Crossroads. Now, for the New York City Commission, he was asked to paint a man at the crossroads, looking with uncertainty but with hope to a new and a better future. But unfortunately, the final work deviated from the sketch that had been approved. And apparently the main problem was that he included a portrait of the communist revolutionary Vladimir Lenin, the first leader of the Soviet Union. So there was a flurry of letters back and forth asking Rivera to replace Lenin, to paint him out, to replace him with another figure, and Rivera refused. He declared that he'd rather see this mural, which was already finished, he'd rather see it destroyed than to have the figure changed, which in his mind was to have it mutilated. And so he was fired. And now there was the question of what to do with the mural. So it was actually either chiseled out or painted over. And in that location in the lobby, there's a completely different work. So when, before it was destroyed, he made sure that photographs were taken detailing the entire mural. And he was then allowed to paint a similar mural in the Palace of Fine Arts, which was completed in 1932. And then he completed the mural there in 1934. So that brings us to the mural that you're looking at now. The new title is Man, Controller of the Universe. And in the center, we have a workman who's controlling machinery. And the four propeller-like shapes that you see stretching out from behind him, those are arcs of light that are created by the giant lenses that you see on the left and the right. And then within these arcs of light, you see exploding suns and cell forms, and these symbolize the discoveries that were made possible by the telescope and the microscope. And then all around are scenes of modern life. So I'll point out just a couple of those. On the left, we have wealthy society women playing cards and smoking. Above them, we have soldiers and war machinery. On the right, we see the portrait of Vladimir Lenin, and he's holding hands with a group of workers. And then above them, we see a Russian May Day rally with red flags. For Rivera, the mural represented contrasting social visions. We have the debauched rich who are watched by the unemployed, while the war rages on and a socialist utopia is ushered in by Lenin. In addition to this commission for Rockefeller Center, which we now see a version of in Mexico City, Rivera also received commissions to paint murals in Detroit and in San Francisco. So if travel is in your plans for the next year or beyond, I highly recommend considering a visit to one of these locations or to Mexico to see some of these murals, and I can assure you, you will not be disappointed.
Dulce, thank you so much. That's such an exciting sort of voyage you took us on, starting from a somewhat humble drawing, right? Or at least quiet and modest and of a labor, but very introspective. I'm going to just back up to my earlier observation, which is not super important, but I was curious why Road Worker was written in English, if we know that on the drawing, if that was Rivera writing it, or perhaps someone who had purchased the drawing. I don't know if that's a history you know of the drawing, perhaps not.
Probably by some unknown hand, probably by a dealer, a gallerist. A lot of these drawings ended up in private collections and in galleries throughout the United States and Latin America. And unfortunately, that is not his inscription on there. It's more descriptive.
Right, cool. I'm gonna ask you to stop sharing your screen and we'll all come together for a moment. Again, I'll invite any questions from our viewers that might pop up in the chat. Let me go back to the gallery view. Great. Wow, this is so interesting for me. I really appreciate all the perspectives that you shared with us. And there's lots of ways to dig in and think about them. On the one hand, I was thinking about how fragile art seems. Derek, that damaged ceramic figurine, Efraín, those prints with holes in them and torn corners and faded greens and pinks, and Dulce, the murals destroyed, and that fragility and how self-serving, how wonderful museums are that are able to preserve those works, but at the same time, the way that the views you're offering us are views that aren't easily seen in a museum. You're taking us beyond the museum to see the prints in popular culture, Efraín. Or Derek, I'm sorry, I missed the name of this necropolis island that you mentioned, but sort of the idea that the proper location of this object is far away and the context is extraordinarily different. And Dulce, of course, the murals you took us to see. So I'd love to ask you to reflect a little bit, each of you, on how you think about art in a museum versus art in maybe its native or proper or originary context, and that tension there for you. Maybe Derek, you can jump in first since you started.
Sure.
If that question interests you.
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple contexts that play with this work, right? I think it's interesting to consider sort of like what it means to look at it when we get to hold it versus mediated by digital screens, right? Just even thinking about current contexts and how different it is to see it in storage versus in flattened and made so like either big or small, depending on what type of screen you're looking at, right? This question sort of really fits this artwork really well, to think about context, and the sort of like placement is really makes a ton of sense, given that this artwork was never intended for museum space. It was never intended to be sort of recontextualized as art. It was never intended to have subsequent like visual encounters, right? It wasn't intended to be seen over time. And so we are in some ways asking of it a new roles in a new context, right? And I think it can serve beautifully multiple purposes, right? I think a generous way of looking at it, let me say a generous way of looking at it could be that it began its life with a certain context in mind, and it is now operating within a new life with a new context. And so I think that's a generous way of of framing how it is that we might be looking at it to learn about aesthetic principles, or we might be looking at it to learn about the sort of relationship between life and the afterlife in the classic Maya period, or we might be looking at it in a way to think about sort of burial rituals in the role of material culture. Many people are very interested in Maya blue, this kind of pigment that we see traces of this amazing blue on that. So we might be interested from a chemistry, an aesthetic connection to chemistry. But those weren't why it was made or why it was put where it was put. And I think, you know, each of us have to sort of determine, right, can we ask of it questions that are engaged in its historic context? Can we ask respectful, generative questions about how it might have been created and why it might have been created and what it might have meant within a burial? Can we also ask a different set of questions about how it can help us understand the past better, how it can help us understand a place better, and how it can help us understand our present relationship to art better, right? I think looking at art objects from other times and places will help sharpen our ability to look at any art from any place, right? So just sort of like sharpening our sort of critical eye. I hope that wasn't too far afield as an answer.
Yeah, I really enjoyed those perspectives, Derek. I think I like the idea, kind of you're setting up poles of the pole of, you know, deep historical understanding and also relevance to where we may be in the present. Like there's different ways of experience art, and each may be valid in different contexts. I appreciate that. Thank you. Efraín, you are muted. If you could unmute for a moment. Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear.
Okay. I would follow up with that, what Derek said, by thinking that Posada and no one in Mexico during Posada's lifetime would have thought that one of those prints would end up in a museum. They were not intended for a museum. And it took some time and took an eye to realize that it belonged to a museum. In a sense, that is a task that people in museum, you, above all, Dulce, keeping an eye and saying, what should come to a museum? I mean, I'm sure that there are things around that we might not think that will belong to a museum. I think, for example, that in a few years, a museum, not a Harn, because we don't have collection of textiles and clothing, but I'm sure that in a few years, a museum with a collection of textile and clothing would be collecting masks from this period. Yes. And face masks. And they would end at the moment. We don't think of a face mask as belonging into a museum, but I'm sure that in a few years they will be in a museum. So also, it's not a task for you people at the Harn, but for the general public to think of do I have something that can go to the Harn and increase that collection?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great perspective. thinking about masks and thinking about the textiles of racial justice and the overlap of the two. It feels very important in our moment, and will speak to the future, I think, as well. And your point is very much taken about Posada never understanding that it would become music. And now we are hungry for those plates, right? To look at the original plates would be so enlightening for us. There's a side, Dulce, I'll come back to you, but there's a side comment about how much people enjoyed the talks, and especially about interest in the elements of surrealism and Mexican art in both Posada, pre-surrealism, and in Rivera's touching on some aspects of surrealism. So maybe we'll talk a little bit more about surrealism in a moment. But Dulce, any thoughts about, so you think about museums a lot and seeing art in a museum and seeing art away from a museum.
Yeah, and that question of art in a museum versus the original context, and in relation to the drawings, like has already been mentioned, they were never intended to be framed and hung. These were the artist's working drawings. I'm thinking of the Rivera's drawings. These were his working sketches that could be inspiration for other projects or in preparation for some of his paintings. But now that we have them in the museum, we have to make choices how we're going to exhibit them and share them with the public. And one of the questions that we grapple with in making that possible is, how is it going to be matted and framed to be hung on the wall? And we have to decide, are we going to show every blemish? You know, you showed, Efraín Barradas, you showed some prints that had some scratches and creases and tears. Same thing with a lot of the prints that we work with at the Harn. And we have to think, well, are we going to show them with all those rough edges and creases and tears and missing edges? Sometimes we tend to want to make the drawing look clean and beautiful for presentation. And sometimes we hide those rough edges with clean mats that hide all of this. So it's a choice to either show it as it is or make it somehow look pristine for the gallery walls.
Yeah, I decided that the first Posada that I show was a document, and I was going to frame it without a mat. The second one was better preserved, and so I put a mat on it to emphasize the figure. But it's for me, that was the first Posada I ever got. And one thing I also must say, this is pure luck that I've been able to get them. Just by accident almost, that I've been able to get them. But I decided to treat it as a document, that first one, and show all the wounds of the paper. And this is a brave soldier. Look at all he has suffered.
Your comments have made me think a little bit, and I don't remember it that well, but Invisible Cities, Italo Calvino, when he talks about, as I recall, the map that was so accurate that you unfold it and it covers up the whole territory that it represents, as one-for-one representation. And you sort of think, we could, if we took this very moment right now, we could have the perfect museum of everything now. And maybe the internet is sort of that, but not really, of course, because it isn't truly representative. But it becomes too much, of course, and you can't see it. And I sort of feel like there's two lessons. One is that museums have to have some way of selecting and choosing what is representative of the areas they collect in. And that's human choices guided by education and knowledge. And the other is also that, and this is a lesson you've all sort of, I think, embodied today, is that we can take the idea that the world is a museum with us wherever we go, when we travel, when we look at popular culture, when we see murals, and look for the art in the world without actually having necessarily to always look into. do come to the museum, don't get me wrong, but we don't have to only go to the museum. You should take that art spirit with you as you travel the world. That's one message I've picked up from you all today. I'm looking at a comment here, let's see. There's a question about what is the issue? I'm not familiar with art and the nuances of showing works. So this is for Dulce maybe. What is the issue with showing a work of art with its imperfections? So what are some of the things you as a curator weigh when you think about that? If you could unpack that a little bit for us.
Mhm. Well, if there are issues with, for example, mold, mildew on the painting, that's a very visible issue that needs to be addressed. So in that case, we would probably have it conserved before we try to show it. But if there is a crease or a tear, as long as it doesn't detract from the appreciation of the image, then we would still show it that way. And if there are any inscriptions by the artist, signature, dates, edition numbers, we want to show all that. So we would make sure, sometimes we have to have an irregular mat cut in order to make all that, to be able to show all of that. Those are just some thoughts.
They are. And then of course, there's, very interesting questions that leads into conservation, whether you choose to restore a work of art, because it may have acquired over time, you may have smoke or residue deposited that has dulled it. Is that an imperfection to preserve because it represents the layers of time, or is it something to remove so we can see the object as it was intended to be seen? So, yeah.
Can I just jump in on that? Maybe
Please do.
Uninvited, but I can speak maybe more broadly, trying to take one step back, not to comment specifically on either of the prints that we just saw, or the print and the drawing that we just saw, but sort of more broadly. One way to answer that question about sort of what are the issues of displaying something with blemishes, creases, accretions, and one way to answer that would be to say that we've seen and we've talked about two distinct ways of ascribing value to an artwork. One which might ascribe that value to the work based on its sort of moment of creation, and the story that we want to tell with that artwork is the relationship between its creator and it as a product. And so we might be really interested in highlighting, I say we, folks who are making these decisions, like the grand we, right, might be interested in highlighting the sort of authorship, right? So do the creases, accretions, things, do they get in the way of the story of the relationship between the person who made it and it as a final product? And that really focuses our time. We're asking questions about the moment in which it was created, not the life that it lived after its creation. And on the other side, then not the sort of highlighting, asking the question, does it get in the way of the story that I want to tell about when it was made, how it was made, why it was made the way it was? The other story, Efraín described really beautifully as sort of, I'd like to highlight the life that this artwork has had in the moments since its production was completed. So the act of creation, done. Now the act of it having a life of its own, that gets really messy, and you could emphasize that messy, or you could decide that that messy simply gets in the way of the more important story, which is the story of the artwork's composition and creation. So that, I think those two, that's a sort of philosophical question that one has to answer, is why do I think that people should see this artwork? And do the sort of the things that we might think of as damages, right? One level is just like, we have to stop it from being further damaged. But another level is that furthering the thought process, the reception, the sort of the critical thinking that we are asking our viewers to do? Or is it getting in the way of that, of the thinking that we would like them to do, or the feeling, responding that we'd like them to do? That's the way that I was thinking about it.
Thank you. Very much appreciate it. I feel like there's a lot more I would love to talk. We're sort of running a little over time here. Efraín, in another context, I want to ask you more about the stone wall of Mexico. I think that's a really important, in fact, maybe that's a good way, because I want to bring it back to Latin American art, because we strayed into other really interesting questions. My fault, I took us there, but maybe to bring us back to thinking about art. We've talked about these poles between in its moment and how we live with it. And maybe that could be a key object for us for a moment to think about, well, to think about that print as capturing the stone wall of Mexico, that seems like a great idea. Maybe not Posada's idea, maybe. So I'd love to hear your talk about that a little bit as a way of kind of maybe rounding this stuff together for us, of the kind of different perspectives and why they're useful in different ways. Posada is Posada, and Posada is usable for our other needs.
Well, you know, there are really three prints. There's a series of three prints. This is the most famous one, the ones of the dance itself. I mean, they're homophobic. Posada is making fun of those men. But this shows what in later times people have done with that. And it has been completely reversed. Okay. And so what was disgraceful, humiliating, even grotesque act has become a point of departure for people in Mexico who are thinking about issues like gay liberation. And it is important because it's trying to create Mexico's own history and not just simply copying from outside. The person who has dealt most with this whole issue was a man, he died in 2010, Carlos Monsiváis. He's a cultural historian, and he wrote a lot about Los 41, okay? 41 is a taboo number in Mexico. You're not 41 years old. You are 20 plus 21 because you don't want to use 41 in Mexican popular culture. So what you can see there is the same way in the 1920s, Posada was being revived in another way. In 1990s, Posada is looked, what was a caricature is looked at in a very positive way. So it's the intention of the viewer. But I would follow Derek's example here, and I will ask Dulce one day to show those Posada and Manilla at the museum. Okay, they're really worthwhile to see. And so please, 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 I mean, you were so nice to me to show them in storage, but I think it would be wonderful if you can show them to the general public. I know they're fragile. They have to be presented under certain light and with a lot of care because they're very delicate. But por favor, show us the Posadas one day.
Absolutely. We've shown a couple of them, but for very short periods of time. So next time that they come out, I will definitely let you know so you can come and see them in the galleries.
And I'm going to ask you to come and speak with us about them, Efraín. I'm so grateful to the three of you for being part of Museum Night, for indeed being Museum Nights this evening. It was a lot of fun for me to chat with you and have my mind expanded. I know our viewers have felt the same from their comments. Wow, as I quoted earlier from Jordan. And I extend my thanks to you. I'll mention that Museum Nights are made possible with the support of UF student government. So we're ever grateful to the students for seeing the value of an art museum to their own experience as students and as people who are trying to support a place of culture in their community, and also the provost of UF who supports Museum Nights as well. So thank you all. I wish you joy and good health, and we'll be seeing you for classes, Derek, and for your next talk about Posada at the Harn, Efraín, when we make plans for that. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Derek, thanks everybody.